ACE2 expression follows a gradient along the respiratory tract with greater expression in the upper airway and decreasing further down. If you think about, well, there's a lot of receptors up here, so it's probably unlikely that the virus is going to get into your airway, miss all of these ACE2 receptors and go down where they're less prominent in the lower airway. So again, what this means is these mutations have rendered SARS-CoV-2 to a cold. Like has been, these endemic coronaviruses, there's about 5 of them that circulate. They infect kids all the time. About 40% of the common cold that people get is from these coronaviruses. The location in which viruses replicate along the respiratory tract guides how the virus will be able to transmit and also its pathogenicity. Traditionally, viruses that bind to the upper airway exhibit lower pathogenicity compared with the other viruses that bind to the lower airways. So again, that trade-off, right? If the virus preferentially binds to the airway tissue up here, it's more transmissible and it's not as virulent, which is the optimal scenario for a virus to remain endemic. So the scientists want to say that testing for these less virulent human cold-causing coronaviruses typically find positive results when samples are done in the upper airway compared to the lower airway, in contrast with SARS-CoV-1 and MERS that occurred in the early 2000s. Rarely were there ever samples found when sampling in the upper airway. It was mostly in the lower airway. Now remember, those viruses were not as transmissible, but they were highly lethal. The case fatality ratio was something like 20 to 30%. So very deadly. If you got those diseases, even if you're metabolically healthy, if you got infected with those bugs, even if you're metabolically healthy, probability of surviving was not so hot. So in conclusion, one hypothesis argues that the strength of the receptor affinity may correlate with the receptor abundance in an inverse relationship, meaning that if a virus can preferentially bind here, that's where it's going to infect the upper airway. So really important stuff here. I think it's really good news. And these are scientists here at this was University of Texas Medical Branch. So I feel a little sheepish putting this out there premature before all the experts, so to speak, are talking about it. But it seems that these mutations are actually good because this renders this pathogen that can be pretty virulent for some people, especially if you have underlying health conditions, if you're overweight, if you're obese, if you're elderly. And if this renders this to a common cold that just causes a little upper respiratory tract infection and not severe systemic disease and pneumonia and compromising lung function, that is good news. And if I'm wrong, I have that right to be wrong, just as all the other health experts pretty much throughout the world. Many people have been wrong, wrong about closing down the economy, suggesting it saves lives. It just prevented transmission or delayed the onset of that. Closing schools, really bad idea. There's a lot of iatrogenesis, and there's no indication that the lack of school closures in Sweden and Europe impacted children in a negative way compared to what we did here in the US, right? So based upon this data, I really hope I'm right. And I'm sure you probably hope I'm right as well, because we all want this thing to end